It's 9 o'clock. It's your call. Good morning. I'm Nicky Campbell. Now, here's the question for you. Should you be forced to give your child the MMR jab? One of the world's leading scientists says not vaccinating your children makes you a hazard to society. Writing in the Times, Dr. Craig Venter wants children banned from schools until they get them. Health officials in England are now launching a campaign to vaccinate 1 million young people against measles because so many children weren't given a full set of jabs when they were little. Should you be forced to give your kids the MMR? Should the government have the right to tell you what to do? Or are your children's vaccinations your choice and your business and your choice only? 0500 909 693. Should you be forced to give your child the MMR jab? Well, one of the world's leading scientists says not vaccinating your children makes you a hazard to society. Writing in the Times, Dr. Craig Venter wants children banned from schools until they get them. Nathan in Northumberland has called us, and you agree with the good doctor. Good morning. Hi. What do you want to say?
Morning, Nicky. I do agree with it. I think I rang up and spoke to your researcher, and the way I see it, the way we see it, myself and my wife, is it's a no-brainer. I mean, why would you be so irresponsible not to vaccinate your child when something that clearly works? And we only have to look at the cases in Swansea, Nicky, to give us a justification to do it, because it's absolutely irresponsible. I mean, why would our son's just turned 13 months yesterday. We're expecting twins in October, and they'll be getting it as well, because why would we want to send our kid to a school knowing that, as the doctor said, it could be a threat to not only the kids in there, but the whole area that we live in? It's absolutely absurd to think you'd be so irresponsible not to vaccinate your child with this. It's ridiculous.
Stay right where you are. Dr. Michael Fitzpatrick, good morning.
Hello.
Why do you believe it should not be compulsory?
Well, I think that measures of compulsion are likely to be ineffective, if not counterproductive. I think we just don't want to be scaring and bullying parents around these sort of issues. In fact, to some extent, that's what's caused this problem in the first place.
Excuse me, as a learned gentleman that you clearly are, how can you say that? You have got 900 families suffering, possible death on the door from this disease, and you're telling them that, well, it's okay for you to make that decision, but never mind, if you're unlucky, you're unlucky. That's absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous to think that you even say that. Come on, man.
Well, look, what happened here is 10 or 15 years ago...
Hang on, wait. Let Dr. Michael Fitzpatrick, who's the author of MMR and Autism, What Parents Need to Know, let him have a say.
I can assure you, I'm very strongly committed to parents getting their children having the MMR, which is a safe and effective vaccine. But I think you have to realise what the problem here is, which is that 10 or 15 years ago, parents were confronted with a very confused set of messages. It made many of them very anxious and fearful about the MMR, and as a result of it, they thought, this is all too much, I'll put the decision off to later, and a lot of children, as a result, haven't been immunised. So we've got this
Whose fault was that?
Of a pool of children now 10 or 15 years old who've not been immunised, and that's what we need to catch up.
Whose fault was that? Is this at the door of the discredited Andrew Wakefield, or was it the media not reporting it properly, or is it the government not being robust enough? Where does the blame lie?
It was a combination of all those things. But I think the situation we've got now is that parents want to do the best for their children, and rational decisions about this are best made if we calm things down a bit, let parents quietly discuss the risks and the benefits of MMR with their doctors and nurses, and I'm sure we can convince them that the risks associated with MMR are entirely groundless, and the benefits of MMR in terms of preventing measles and mumps and rubella are very real.
I agree.
So what's the way ahead?
Well, that's the way ahead. I think the government's helpfully made available the more vaccines. People have got the message out that they should check their children's immunisation status. If they haven't had the 2 MMRs, get them down to the GP, get them caught up, get them protect not only their own children, but also the other children in the community. I entirely agree that we do need to protect the most vulnerable children in society by getting the rates of MMR back up again.
Nathan, stay where you are. Michael Fitzpatrick, likewise. David's in Manchester. He's called us. David, good morning. Should this be compulsory?
Yes, good morning, Nicky. Well, I just remember, I'm 42 years old, and I just remember going in primary school, some of those days where you were injected with every vaccine that you could have.
Do you remember the BC? It was a BCG they used to call it or something, didn't they?
Yeah, and you had a couple of kids who responded very badly to it and all that kind of stuff, and it used to be a celebration where you're getting vaccinated. But what was if it was the government minister who all of a sudden decided, actually, we will not vaccinate children anymore? Can you try?
Well, it wasn't a government decision, Michael Fitzpatrick, was it? As you say, it was an unfortunate confluence of events and attitudes.
Yeah, and I think what your caller's recalling is the very old days when polio jabs were given in school in those ways. But the MMR's never been given in schools. It's always been given through health services. And, we've been very successful in getting the rates back up again. And we just need one big push, I think, and we can get the older children caught up and prevent these outbreaks from happening. But
why not make it compulsory? Stay there. You think it would be counterproductive, but Dr. Sarah Jarvis, GP, clinical consultant to Patient UK, media-friendly...
Pop in, Nicky, a second.
You can in a second. Let me bring Sarah Jarvis in first. I'd love you to pop back in, Nathan. And I'll let you do just that in a minute. Let's get the views of Sarah Jarvis. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning.
Michael Fitzpatrick says it would be counterproductive to make this compulsory, and that was part of the problem in the first place. What are the arguments for making everybody do it?
I think it's very difficult. In the USA, they do have compulsory immunisation. You're not allowed to get into secondary school without it. The difference is that, of course, parents in the USA have never gone through this dreadful process. And I have to say, I feel that the media has a great deal to answer for, because when Wakefield produced his first study, there were 12 children in the study. I was working a lot in the media at the time. I was asking the media to cover stories of 3-4 million children with no evidence of a problem between MMR and measles, no evidence of a link, and it didn't get covered. So parents whose children came to be immunised at the time really, really struggled. And what I think we're seeing is that parents now have got over it. They've seen him be struck off the medical register. They've seen that this has been completely discredited. We're now, for instance, in Wales, up to 94.3% of children getting the MMR in the present cohort. But it's the parents who went through it before. They went through all that agony. I think for them, it would be really, really difficult because they went through that emotional trauma.
This is always the problem, isn't it, with contentious scientific arguments. So the media, the BBC and others, they give too much weight to the sort of counterintuitive, to the dissenters, to the unorthodox, because it makes for good debate. Is that what happened?
I'm afraid I very, very firmly believe that it was. I mean, for instance, I was at the time of the height of the scandal spending maybe half an hour speaking to parents, trying to explain it. I'd give them all the evidence. I'd show them the statistics. I'd tell them about 3 and 4 million children studies showing no evidence of a link, showing that the rate of autism hadn't changed at all since MMR was introduced. And at the end of it, I'd look at them and say, and now you can ask me the question that's really going to convince you. And it was always the same question. And that question was, did you have your kids immunised? But I remember going on to 5 Live some years ago at the height of this, and somebody turning to me and saying, well, can you really tell us that you don't get paid every time you stab a child? You know, it's just so insulting. I was taking half an hour to get 50p in terms of immunisation. The amount of time. I did this because I believed passionately when I'd seen the complications. I'd actually done my lecture. Well, listen, I'd seen the complications.
There's a tweet here, kind of in that area, from Neil. Morning, Neil. He's sent me this via Twitter. If you allow the state to administer compulsory vaccinations in partnership with pharmaceutical companies, that is fascism.
What can I say? The government spends millions and millions of pounds trying to prevent a condition, which, of course, I've had a lot of responses when I've blogged about this on patient.co.uk, people saying, we all had measles when we were children, it didn't do us any harm. Well, no, the vast majority of children will get over it, but up to 1 in 20 will get pneumonia, up to 1 in 200 will get seizures, up to 1 in 1,000 will get encephalitis, inflammation of the brain. The problem is, of course, if you've got over it, you think, what's everybody making a fuss about it? Okay. I had it, and I didn't have any problems.
Stay there, Doctor. I want to put this caller to you, Ian in Hampshire, and I will come back to you, Nathan. I promise. I give you my word. Ian, you think this is a no-no, don't you?
Absolutely.
it is a complete... I mean, Dr. Sarah Jarvis, she comes on with this stuff. She's in the media and what have you. And it's all about money. They're making an absolute fortune.
Who is?
The drug companies out of this.
Drug companies.
The drug companies and the government. And the percentage of children that will have a problem with it is minute compared to the vast nation. I don't know what is going on.
What right do you have to send your child to school without being vaccinated to give my child the disease, which your child might be fine? One second. Well, your child might be fine, but mine might be fine, but my child might pass it to another child and might die. Come on, man. It's ridiculous.
It's absurd.
It's okay, so it's rubbish. It doesn't happen.
If my child is cold...
All right, Ian, let's hear from Ian. Let's hear from Ian. Go on.
So if my child has a cold, are they not allowed to go to school because they've got a cold?
We're talking cold. We're talking measles here. We're not talking cold.
Yeah, I know, but obviously...
Your argument is flawed. Your argument is flawed purely and simply because my child might contract it from your child and be totally fine, and that might go down the line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the 7th child and the 8th child might get seriously ill, and because of that. Now, come on, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. And
let's get back to Ian's point there, which I want to put to Sarah as well. That the bottom line is money. This is a money-making exercise.
It's a massive. The irony
Sarah Jarvis.
The irony is that Ian has said that the government is making millions out of it. The government is spending absolute millions on it. It's not making money out of it. It is spending millions because we know what the consequences are.
Sarah. It's the drug companies are making millions.
Yeah, but the drug companies
aren't. Why would the chief medical officer?
They aren't all Bond villains, you know.
Because he wants the drug companies to make it. It's all.
Nicky, I have to go. Thank you very much.
That's a shame. Bye, Nathan. Thanks for your contributions. Nathan's left the building. Everybody, Ian, carry on.
Who is making money out of it? The drug companies are making money out of it. The government are paying the drug companies. They're getting the backhanders from them. They're getting it's complete farce. It really is. They've got, they're making the BBC come on. So you've got to have the MMR. Everybody goes out and have to get the MMR vaccination. The drug companies are going ka-ching. That's nice.
Dr. Michael Fitzpatrick,
the thing is,
do you want to come back in?
One of the reasons why the vaccines has never been a very profitable area for the drug companies is it's just a one-off thing. It's not like you can have a drug that you've got to take every day for years on end. So there's never been any great interest of the pharmaceutical companies in vaccination. But so I think it's always been a completely flawed argument, this.
No, of course it is. They are making millions out.
Why are those two doctors saying that you're wrong? Are they in the pay of the big drug companies or something?
I wish.
Because they're in the establishment where they've got to follow.
Because they're in the what? And if they're in the establishment, have they got their?
If I was doing this,
party line.
Nicky, if I may say so, if I was doing this because I was being paid and I get 50p for spending half an hour with a parent, that's £2 an hour. Do you really think I couldn't earn more money doing something else? I do it because I believe passionately in preventing children getting ill. We have seen a condition which, before MMR immunisation was introduced, killed 2,500 children every year in the UK. I've worked in India. I have seen I've seen entire wards of diphtheria cases where children were dying, half of them who got this condition. If you go to India and you say people in the UK don't want to have their children immunised, they would look at you and say, how obscene.
Sarah, thank you. It's 9:18. More to come. Here's Michelle.
This is 5 Live Breakfast. Your call.
We'll be hearing from Andy Verity on those growth figures. We will be taking the Office of National Statistics press conference and finding out if we are indeed, according to those figures, in a triple-dip recession. As I talk, Mr. Verity is sauntering into the studio with bits of paper. Hi, Andy. We'll be with you later on. When are we here? 9:30, the official announcement, isn't it?
9 minutes from now. I'll bring him right to you.
All right. Andy's on standby. Sarah's in Peterborough talking about vaccinations. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Nicky.
And let me see now. We've still got Dr. Michael Fitzpatrick too. So, the question this morning, just to remind anyone who's tuning in amidst all the yelling, It's an emotive issue. Of course it is. Should you be forced to give your child the MMR jab? One of the world's leading scientists says not vaccinating your children makes you a hazard to society. Sarah, what do you think?
I think it's just dreadful to say that. I think it's absolutely barbaric. It's all about parental choice. And as a mum of two who's chosen single injections, I think that to enforce the dreaded MMR on parents without any choice, I just think it's absolutely dreadful.
So there should be choice. Choice not to do it at all, or choice not to do it?
No, I think there should be information available, and I think that's the problem. I think parents have had to seek out information on individual injections, which is at times very unfair. I've had to take both my children 8 years apart to an NHS GP who runs a clinic 2 hours away so they can access individual injections. And I feel it's down to cost. I just wish that I could go to my GP and my children could have individual injections which are safer than the MMR, but unfortunately that choice is taken away from me, so I do have to access a very good GP who is NHS registered, like I say. It's not a travelling clinic or anything, but that should be the option, single injections.
Michael Fitzpatrick, should it?
It's not a safer choice, I'm afraid. I mean, for a start, you can't get the mumps vaccine as a separate vaccine. And the very fact of having the vaccines spaced wider apart means that your child will be exposed to a risk of getting these diseases if there's an outbreak like we have at the moment of measles. If they haven't got round to getting the separate vaccine yet, it means the child having, instead of 2 injections with MMR, they have to have 6 separate immunisations, and any attempt to do that is bound to be less efficient, and it's going to be less safe, I'm afraid.
No, I don't think children do need 6 injections. For a start, boys don't need rubella, because at the present time, boys can't get pregnant. So there's not a need for boys to have rubella.
At the present time.
You take one of those injections out of the MMR. Example, I had mumps as a child. I'm 35. Difficulties with mumps are very rare. So I think now we are over-vaccinating children. And I think if you look at the evidence out there, and I've done great research over the last 10 years and have not come to this decision lightly, and I don't think there are a need for children to have the mumps, measles and rubella.
Dan in South Wales, I want to bring Dan in. Sarah, stay there. Dan's going to respond to you, I think. Dan, what do you want to say to Sarah?
Do you know, I was just laughing just a minute ago. Who's the professional in this conversation? That lady over there who's mother, or the gentleman who's done loads of research?
What do you do?
It's laughable, and this is why we've had.
Well, Sarah, let's hear him. I'll come back to you, Sarah. Dan, what do you do?
I work with the NHS Wales Ambulance. I'm a first responder, and NHS as a responsible employer has to bring all my immunisations up to top to protect myself, but also to protect the patients that I could carry the disease into. Now, if I spread that disease from one patient to another, do you think that person would not sue the NHS for not immunizing me and protecting the population? But just leaving this aside, a few weeks ago, we heard the Taliban killing health workers in Pakistan and Afghanistan for delivering in the fight to eradicate diseases. And we thought that they're barbaric idiots. Well, we've got pockets of idiocy around Swansea and elsewhere in the country for the same reason. And to say that we need more information to make an informed decision, exactly more information is what got us here. Because people think because they read a thing on the internet, they've got more information and they're more informed than a health professional.
Sarah, come back in now.
Can I just say, with respect, I've done over 10 years research on this. I do not read papers on the internet. I've worked with children that are disabled. I've spoken to parents who had the MMR injections back in 88, 89, 90. This is a very informed decision. And to talk about parents being responsible and linking them to the Taliban, I think is rather crazy.
Let's bring in Professor Keith Neal, who's called us from Derby.
I think it's at the end of the day, I think it's very hard to dispute that any single injection is not as safe as the triple injection. It's incredibly safe to give children individual injections.
We've got another professor. Would you believe it? Hello?
Hello, yes, I'm Keith Neal. I'm a professor, emeritus professor of infectious disease epidemiology.
Thank you for calling us.
Study of these sort of problems. I'd like to make a couple of points, and 3 now. One, I think most people haven't seen measles. And I think, personally, allowing your child's measles could be considered a form of neglect, because it is really very serious. The second point I was going to make was about, I don't think we can make it compulsory in a democracy, because there are genuine religious objections, which we do believe in letting people have. But I think there's certain senses like council-run nurseries where the place is provided free, and we know that children are potentially vulnerable there, that it could be made a condition of a free place. And I just picked up the end of the mumps discussion. People think of mumps as not being very serious. Well, for most people it isn't, but it can cause infertility in men. Also, it was the commonest cause of meningitis in children prior to our vaccination programme, and responsible for quite a lot of unilateral deafness on one side, and that's from good studies when the army in Scandinavia.
Emeritus Professor, thank you very much indeed for calling us. It's been most informative, and thank you for listening and taking the trouble to participate in something that you know much about. Right, let's take the weather. We've got that ONS announcement coming. Back at the ranch, we're discussing vaccination. Should you be forced to give your child the MMR jab? We'll speak to Catherine in Hampshire and Mike in Hampton. And Dr. Evan Harris, former Lib Dem MP. Good morning. We've had some. Still, there is a great deal of misapprehension, and indeed one might even say ignorance amongst many members of the public about this. We've heard some of it this morning, haven't we?
Yes, I mean, you had one caller I heard say that boys don't need the rubella jab, which is part of the combined MMR, because they get pregnant, and German measles is a danger to pregnant women. But I was surprised you didn't leap in immediately, Nicky, and point out that pregnant women who are unvaccinated can catch it from unvaccinated boys.
And we had two GPs on the line at the time.
Yeah, I think they were dealing with other issues, which you also got wrong. And obviously it's a disaster, can be a disaster for pregnant women to get German measles. That is why boys are vaccinated against it, and they also avoid catching it themselves, of course, as a nasty illness. So and again, you've got another caller saying that mumps was trivial. It's absolutely not trivial, as one of your other contributors made clear. You know, you get major complications from mumps, and that's well known. So we do have a problem, and that's why we need to ensure that the media at least put both cases, which they never used to, and when they do put both cases, as they do now, they make clear there's a difference between campaign lobby groups making their case, the anti-vaccine movement that's existed for decades and will still always exist with us, spreading misinformation, that group is not supported by the evidence.
So it's important now to be absolutely scrupulous in not just balance for the sake of argument, but proper scientific balance.
Yes, exactly. And I think many in the media have understood that. I mean, obviously, it's hard to have an argument with one side, but in science, of course, it's 99.9% on one side where the evidence is, and the 0.1% mavericks. And the scientific debate recognises that, whereas on television, you want an argument, so you have two people. And sometimes you have a doctor put in the other case. There's a Dr. Richard Halverson who still campaigns against the MMR. Now, there are many doctors out there who make money from selling single vaccines, separate vaccines, which are less effective, and there's less evidence for their safety. So they have a big vested interest in arguing against MMR, and yet they're given credence by some in the media. And the Daily Mail still runs stories about vaccine safety that are unfounded. So we have a problem, and the more
is the answer
on the BBC, the better.
So is the answer, and we're going to speak to Catherine in a second to respond to this, and Dermot in Liverpool, let me see, and Mike in Hampton, as I said. Is the answer, Evan Harris, doctor, compulsory vaccination?
No, I think the answer is not compulsory or mandatory, and there's a difference, of course. Compulsory would mean forced vaccinations, and that's unethical. You can only ever impose medical treatment on unwilling people who have capacity to consent, or the parents in the case of those without capacity, if there's an imminent health risk to other people, not to themselves, but to other people. And the risk from unvaccinated groups is not direct enough to justify it. So in
in highly infectious conditions, you can detain people in hospital under the law. So it's a really big deal to make it compulsory. Mandatory means that you say you don't get into nursery unless you have it, and that doesn't mean you have to have it. It just means you're denied certain services. I think that would be counterproductive in this country. You'd create vaccine martyrs, and people would say, oh, they've got something to hide. It would feed conspiracy theories. I think we can win with reason, education and information, as we are.
Mike, do you want to come in here? Mike in Hampton.
Hi, yes. I got measles when I was 7 years old, and it nearly killed me. I was in, well, not hospitalised, but home in bed for about nearly 2.5 months. And it was, I just remember patches of it, coming in and out of delirium. But it was, it affected my education because I lost 3 months of schooling. And it's one of the worst things. I've had other illnesses, but that was by far the worst that I've experienced.
So should it be mandatory even?
Not mandatory, but parents just. The problem is that parents, since the Second World War, have had very little experience of the effects of measles or exposure to measles, because the vaccinations became available. But it's outbreaks like this that it's the consequences to their children. That they may have fears, but from my own personal experience, I mean, it was just terrible. It really was terrible.
What was it like? Just bones exploding, one of those things, and a feeling.
Sorry?
What was the feeling? Do you remember?
What was the feeling? It was, as I said, it was. I was at school 1 minute and home the next, and I just have these occasional memories of coming in and out of delirium.
Yeah.
People standing by the bedside. I had no idea what was going on at all. Just feeling, just very, very, very ill.
Catherine, what do you want to say this morning?
Well, really, I don't know about mandatory vaccination. I feel that perhaps you shouldn't be allowed to go to school unless you have it. But if I can just quickly tell you, 13 years ago, my now nearly 14-year-old grandson was due to have his measles jab, the MMR. My daughter had a baby who had strep B and lived for 15 hours. And this was the week that Theo was supposed to have his MMR jab. And because my daughter was absolutely terrified, it was at the height of all the arguments about autism, at the height of that time, and she didn't want to anyway put her child at risk. You can imagine the state she was in. So she cancelled the MMR triple jab. And I spent days on the phone trying to find somewhere where I could get him the single jabs, and it ended up that we were going to have to take him to France. Anyway, some time passed, maybe a month, and she still didn't have him done because she was still, you can imagine the state she was in. And she was watching an episode of ER, which George Clooney was in, and into the emergency room came a child desperately ill with measles. And I think it was the first time that my daughter had realised just how desperately ill kids with measles are, and they thought this little boy was going to die. The next week, she took him to her GP and had the MMR vaccine. Now, that's not apocryphal, that's true. I sat through it. But I'm wondering if some sort of big campaign showing how desperately ill children can be when they've got measles, because I think a lot of mums, maybe not now, but certainly back then, thought it was, just one of those things you're off for a few days. My own son had it when he was 4. He's now 46. He was really ill. My cousin's son had it and is now profoundly deaf. It's not just one of those things, let's have a party and all get measles. It's a really, really nasty disease. But I thank God for George, for many other reasons, for George Clooney, because he persuaded this woman that she'd been very silly, and that why do middle-class mothers think they know better than the experts. And also, I worked for a time at an American Army hospital over in Belgium, and I worked in the school's medical clinic, because the kids all have to have a medical once a year, and I'm pretty sure that they weren't allowed to go to school if they didn't have the MMR jab. I don't know what happened if they didn't have it, whether you excluded them totally, but maybe it's advertising we need. Maybe it's a bit of, look what this can do to children, not it's just something that they get over, because a lot of them don't.
I couldn't agree more with you.
Could you? Oh, how very nice.
Makes a nice change on this program.
Well, no, I usually agreed with.
Yeah. Dr. Evan Harris, do you want to come back in?
Yes, there's an interesting question you asked earlier about who's to blame, and you might think that's kind of retrospective because no one's going to take these sorts of allegations on MMR seriously again. But I think there will be future health scares, and I think there are lessons for authorities. I think it was entirely wrong that Wakefield... Can I make this point?
Yes, of course, sorry.
It was entirely wrong that Wakefield was allowed to even do his research because it was found to have been unethical, not just flawed scientifically. The Lancet should never have published that paper on any basis, on the science basis, if it had done proper peer review, proper checks, because it gives it credibility when it's in a medical journal.
Yeah, but it's right. The paper
hang on a minute, Catherine, let Evan finish. I'll come
one more
to you.
point. And let's look at the politicians. I'm certainly not arguing, and I was involved in this when I was in the House of Commons at the time. I'm not arguing that politicians should be leading the campaign for vaccination because they're not that trusted. But what they shouldn't do is make political mischief out of it, as I'm afraid some MPs did at the time.
Absolutely.
Julie Kirkbride, Dr. Liam Fox, did not support the government, as I did, even though I didn't support the government on many other things at the time, the Blair government, on this, and that was grossly irresponsible because it gave credence to the idea that there was a legitimate scare, and we have to.
Tony Blair
I hope politicians have learned the lesson.
Say whether his son had the MMR vaccine, he kept saying he would not say yes or no.
No, I think he was right not to, because I don't think we should insist on the medical confidentiality of children being up for grabs.
Not even on such a massive issue.
See, the problem is that out of 600 MPs, there will be some children for whom vaccination is contraindicated because of immune deficiency. That's their business. So if you expect every politician to reveal their children's medical history, okay, which doesn't give the child the chance to say, this is my business, and I'll do it when I'm older.
No, but there was such a controversy about it, Evan Harris. It was such an emblematic issue, such a signal issue at the time. Just one word would have done... One word.
The problem is that sets the precedent, and every politician then has to say whether their child has immune deficiency or other contraindications. It's absolutely wrong that you should involve the children of politicians in this way. I'm not keen on the children of politicians being used generally, and Blair was not good on other matters in that respect. It doesn't mean that this poor child should be public property.
Could he not have said, I don't really want to discuss it, but actually I think it's a jolly good idea? Could he not have said that?
He did say that's exactly what he said, and it wasn't good enough for the Daily Mail or Private Eye, and that was very sad.
But maybe
was he right to refuse to on another issue? Then, if we don't bring it, I'm just interested in this line just for a moment or two. Are politicians right, especially politicians on the left, when they refuse to confirm or deny whether their children are getting private education, private tuition, tuition, for example?
Well, again, that's a tougher one. Clearly, medical history is much more private and recognised in law, indeed in the Data Protection Act, as being in a special category.
There was a row at the time about Blair's children getting private tuition, I remember, tutors going in and out of Downing Street.
As I say, that goes to hypocrisy, and you wouldn't be breaching the medical confidentiality of the child. So that's a tougher one to justify, and I'm not seeking to do that. But in this case, it's very clear.
OK, let me bring Dermot in Liverpool. Actually, Dermot, hang on, stand by. I'll come to you in a second. Here's the trouble. Michelle has it. Good morning. Yes, Dermot, sorry about that. What would you like to say?
Oh, I was just going to say in the United States and France, basically, parents do have the option of whether vaccinations are given to their children or not. But if they refuse, there are consequences as a result of the refusal. In the United States and France, for instance, you can't go to school.
That's mandatory, yeah.
So basically mandatory. So in other words, it's a health and safety issue. If parents are insisting from getting ill-informed information from, let's say, the internet, and refusing the vaccination, that basically they're putting their child at risk, and they're also putting other children at risk of getting any of these infectious diseases, never mind MMR. I mean, obviously, measles just happens to be the one in the news at this moment in time. That it comes down to a health and safety issue.
A health and safety issue, Barry?
Yes, it could very well be a health and safety issue. I think that everybody nowadays with young children should get them vaccinated against the measles. Through my own experience, I had measles when I was 3 years of age. And I spent a year in hospital with other problems with my kidneys from measles. And consequently now I'm in my 60s. I'm now in final stages of renal failure and due to start dialysis at any moment.
Blimey.
All through the measles.
All stemming from the measles, yeah?
Yeah. So I think, this day and age, we should be having our children vaccinated against it. It's a terrible disease. And through my own experience, that's what I maintain.
More from Evan Harris in a second. Natalie in Derbyshire. Hello.
Hello.
Go on. Compulsory vaccination?
Well, I'm just appalled that some people seem to think that there's some sort of conspiracy to make money out of the concept of compulsory vaccination. Vaccinations don't make pharmaceutical companies a great deal of money. Pharmaceutical companies make money from treating chronic conditions. Similarly, healthcare professionals do not get paid vast amounts of money to vaccinate children. This is about a child protection issue, nothing else.
That's a strong point. Tim in the West Midlands, though. Evan, you can respond to Tim. Tim, what would you like to say on 5 Live, your call?
Well, just going back to the Tony Blair thing, he had a golden opportunity there to lead by example, didn't he? And surely that's what politicians should be doing, isn't it,
Involving their children in private healthcare decisions.
Well, for better or worse, you're in public life, aren't you?
So
and he's actually the Prime Minister, so,
do you have children?
I do, yeah, too.
Did they get the MMR?
One did, my first didn't, my second didn't.
Why not?
Because it was the time it was all breaking airs, and I saw him being interviewed on TV, and he refused to say whether his children had it or not. So I thought, well, he must know, mustn't he? The Prime Minister must know whether it's dangerous or not.
Evan Harris.
Well, it turns out, as it happens from a book written typically by Sherry Blair, that the child had the vaccine. So,
well, why didn't he say that then?
Well, because I rightly, in my view, he thinks it's not anyone's business to force him to disclose the medical details of his family. For example, if there was a pill scare now, could happen, okay? Does David Cameron have to say whether Samantha Cameron is taking that form of contraception? Absolutely none of our business. We should not be taking our medical advice from politicians' families, frankly. We should listen to medical people, preferably those, and I point against myself here, not involved in politics who have ulterior motives. But the other thing I wanted to say, because I've been mean about some in the press, is that this was exposed, the Wakefield fraud and charlatanry, by a Sunday Times investigative journalist, Brian Deere. Wasn't exposed by the hospital authorities or even some of the skeptics who were on the right side, who I work with, but didn't find the smoking gun. He did a huge amount of work. And people like him have had a lot of vitriol from the anti-vaccine campaign, who are a vicious bunch. Very effective, actually, getting their message across, but vicious. Same with Mike Fitzpatrick, who you had on earlier. He was targeted by these people. So there have been some heroes in this, and we need to learn the lessons for the future, because there will be more health scares.
Well, Nicola's in Knutsford.
Can I just say,
if I may. Sorry, what you say? I wanted to go to Nicola.
Well, I was just saying, I'm going to get him vaccinated now, but you've got to remember he's a big strapping lad now, I'm a little child full of 3 different vaccines.
Gotcha. Okay, and that's the dilemma facing Nicola in Knutsford. What is your dilemma? How old's your little boy, Nicola?
My little boy is 20 months old, and I really am caught on the horns of this dilemma, because I think I've looked, as a lot of people do, and you do turn to Google whether it's the right thing to do or not, and there's an awful lot of stuff on there from parents who genuinely believe that vaccines such as the MMR have harmed their children, not just with autism. The debate isn't really just about autism. It's about potential sort of autoimmune diseases, complications with digestive systems, and all sorts of other kind of behavioural problems. Children are adversely affected. Some children are adversely affected by vaccines, and it's very difficult to predict which ones will be and which ones won't be. And I genuinely am sort of sitting here thinking, on the one hand, there's an awful lot of evidence out there, which, it's unproven and it's anecdotal, if you like. But what I would like to see is a genuine study that compares the the horror stories that you see on the internet and mitigates against them and spells out in statistical form, so it makes it much easier for people to make that decision. I'm really torn. I'm leaning towards getting the MMR done, but I'm genuinely concerned about the potential long-term effects of it.
Evan Harris, what's your message to mums and dads like that, like Nicola?
Well, the evidence is very clear. This has been investigated more than anything else because of this scare. In fact, money that could have been spent on looking at some of the real issues around the causation of autism, for example, a very serious condition, have been misspent examining to death the issue of the relative safety of MMR. This has been thoroughly researched. It is found to be not only the most effective way of protecting children against some nasty conditions, and indeed the rest of society who can catch it from unvaccinated children, but it's also been shown to be extremely safe. And I think people who have given the vaccine to their children, which is the vast majority, should be applauded for that when they, at the height of the scare, when all they could read in some of the newspapers, including the Telegraph and the Times, were editorials saying there's a problem. There wasn't a problem, and they should be applauded.
Sorry, can I just make a point here, Nicky? People who are torn by this dilemma are not being irresponsible. They're not stupid people. They're not people that don't care around the rest of society. They're people who desperately love their kids and want to do the best possible thing by them, not just now, but in the future. And I absolutely take on board what you've just said there. However, there is still this massive undercurrent of people that would absolutely refute everything that you've just said.
Well, refute means to disprove. I don't think they'd be able to do that. But Nicola, thank you so much for that. You're saying what a lot of mums and dads are still saying, and likewise, Dr.